Hello, friends. Thank you very much for joining us for our fourth and final Creating a Circle of Support for Ourselves and Our Children webinar, Reflections on the 5 Positions of Control. It's great to see so many returning names and faces, and we're really excited to wrap up our webinar series today. AmazeWorks acknowledges that COVID-19 has highlighted inequity in our nation, our world, our states, and our cities. We are bringing these webinars to you in recognition that you are coming to this space with your own lived experiences. We hope to provide windows, mirrors, and especially support to help you navigate some of the social and emotional work we can do to champion equity and belonging for all. And with no further ado, here is Robin Starch.
Hello, I'm so glad you're joining us today. For those of you who have joined us for all 4 of our webinars, great, I'm so glad. I hope they've been helpful for you and that you'll find some use out of today's. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we're going to be doing some reflection and talking about the 5 positions of control. And in doing that, I just want to figure out how to move my slide. There we go. Take a quick poll. I want to see kind of where the group is at, and Rebecca's going to fill me in and let me know. But basically, how many of you are aware of the 5 positions of control? And so if you could just take a quick poll, we'll get some interaction going from you all here. And then a second and a third question that we will ask. So it's asking me to submit. Go away, poll. Not sure. Oh, there we go. And then asking about big emotions, because this is really about information to help you during this time of change to navigate being in a new place where you're caregiving or you're parenting, and how can you do that in a way that's creating support both for yourself and for the children that you care for. So just answer those quick polls that I have there, and I'm gonna give you just a little bit of information about what we're gonna talk about today. Transition model, that's important. Amygdala hijack, what happens to our brain when we're thinking about all this change that's been happening. Then we'll unpack the 5 positions of control, and it's really asking you as the adult to just kind of look at what's my past telling me about how I was raised, what was the behavior management that was used when I was a kid, and then looking at what are the things, I sneezed, excuse me. What are the things that you can do in that reflection to then look at where are you now, and then what can we do with all of that? So to the left is what we're going to be talking about today. To the right is the anti-bias education tenets that we at Amaze do the majority of our work and focus on. And it's actually very closely tied to what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is you know, how do we create empathy and understanding when people are going through a tough time, yourself or children? How do you look for developing that healthy, complex identity that our children are developmentally going through the different ages and phases as they grow? And then being able to, you as an adult, have conversations with your kids about differences, the way you're different from them and they are different from their friends, or what, like Rebecca said, that windows and mirrors kind of thing that kind of helps give us a glance at the bigger world that's out there. And looking at how can we name, notice, and reject bias, prejudice, and stereotypes when we see it. And one of the things that I do a lot when I work with schools with AmazeWorks is we talk about the 5 positions of control with teachers, and talk with them about how are they able to acknowledge where they're at when it comes to that path of equity and inclusion, and how can they reflect on the positions of control for behavior management that they learned from their parents or their caregivers when they were growing up. And then if you're lucky, maybe you get one behavior management class when you're studying as a teacher in college, and then it's just kind of learning on the job as you go. And so we unpack those things a lot when we work with teachers, but as always, we do our best to be able to encourage people to take action to create change. And the change that I'm going to ask for you to do is to, well, let's put it into our body as I have with everything else. Take a big breath in, put your arms out in front of you if you can, wiggle your fingers, and then clasp your hands in front of you. Take a breath and exhale. And with your hands clasped, look down and notice which thumb is on top. And so as we talk about the 5 positions of control today, I'm going to ask for you to embrace being a little uncomfortable. And if you feel, you can share opinions and questions in the chat, and hopefully by the end of this, we'll answer those questions. But we all normally clasp our hands in a natural, like for us, way of doing it. Now I'm going to ask you to embrace something different and reclasp so that the other thumb is on top and you've reclasped your hands. And then think about how that feels. Oftentimes when I'm working in schools, I hear teachers saying, "Oh, that's weird," or "Oh, that's uncomfortable." You can shake your hands out and relax, take a breath in and exhale. If you want to comment in the chat how that felt to embrace that hand clasping, it's a metaphor for embrace the uncomfortable, because we're going to be talking about our past a little bit. And when we talk about our past, it's not always easy. But the reason that we're talking about our past is because of what we know about brain science. Neuroscience has come a long way. And what they've discovered is that brains develop in very different ways depending on their attachment with adults and how they're able to form those attachments throughout growing. Brain doesn't stop growing until you're about 24 or 25. So it happens, it's a long process. And including when you're in a facing with an adverse situation. And of course, the adverse situation that I'm talking about is we've just released Shelter in Place. And so this is the William Bridges transition model. And oftentimes I talk about how, like, if you have to move, you know when you're going to move. And so where that arrow is on your upper left is like this small neutral zone of a transition in the white where you create a new beginning. But with this experience that happened in March 13th, when it was close all the schools, and then March 25th, when it was shelter in place, and now a new beginning has arisen where we slowly no longer have shelter in place, but it's a safe shelter. And what are the guidelines and how do we need to be? And we still have to distance. And we still have about 3 weeks left of school for some people. And so how do we juggle all of this neutral zone that I've used the analogy before, but it feels like a hurricane or a tornado, like this natural disaster that just came and then left. And we're still stuck kind of spinning in that neutral zone, trying to figure out what the new beginning is. And the reality is this: yes is not a straight line. And so when it comes to working with our kiddos and giving them what they need, we have to remember that our brains work in a certain way. And so when it comes to being able to handle our kids in a way where they're not stuck, like in this picture, that guard dog, that's the amygdala, those 2 places right there. And because of all of this change that has happened in these new beginnings of doing online school, being at home when parents are being home, and having to be working on the computer at different times, internet difficulties, all the things that are the things that we've experienced since about March 13th. There's a little bit of that amygdala hijack. I'm going to ask for you, I always ask people to put it in the body. And this is information you can share with your teenagers. You can even share it with little nippers if you want, because the more they understand what's going on in their body and their brain and their emotions, the better it is for them to be able to talk about it and then navigate things with you. So I always tell kids and teachers, put your fists up. So if you're an amygdala hijack because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm really stressing about a lot of things, and there's a lot of things to be stressing about, you're in that guard dog mode. And so what we have to do to get learning to happen for you especially is to release it so that the dog is a little bit neutral. So put your hands crossed like this, and then just tap your right hand on top of your left hand 9 times. And when you've done that, take a breath in. Don't forget to breathe. We forget to breathe sometimes. Tap the other hand, the left hand, on top of the right. That bilateral tapping that happens that I've asked you to do is a thing that it creates this, I'm going backwards. I got to go forwards. There we go. It creates this calm in the amygdala so that the watcher can start looking at what's going on. And then once the brain has relaxed and the amygdala is no longer in a guard dog mode, but they're actually relaxed and just watching, then that detective part starts looking and problem solving and figuring things out, and that it engages the Wikipedia pages. And those Wikipedia pages, if you take your fingers and you kind of like just go round and round like this, that movement, or if you did it on your hands like this, the bilateral tapping thing, once again, take a breath in and exhale. When we are in amygdala hijack, we have to be able to start looking and listening and problem solving so that the Wikipedia pages of our long-term memory and short-term memory can help us get through things. And the way that you get through is meeting your needs. We all have, according to Glasser, 5 basic needs. Now, that safety piece in the middle, it's no more a need than someone else, but we got to be balanced no matter what. But I've worked with kids that are homeless, and that safety need was pretty huge. But even when they were dealing with difficult times in their family, they still had that love of their family, and they had friends, and they found support from people at school. And so some of the students that I've worked with in over 30 years of working with kids, I've seen, as long as they balance their needs, no matter what tough times they're going through, and they're aware of getting out of that amygdala hijack, they can create opportunities for learning. So I'm gonna kind of get us into this whole, what are the 5 positions of control? And the reason why is because when we need to meet our kids' needs, if we're stuck in a position of control that's a punisher, we're gonna find out that we might be at odds and in conflict with our kids. So if you've been in conflict with your kids, you might have found yourself yelling or pointing. If you don't do it, I'm going to take away your iPad, is what I sometimes hear my daughter saying to the grandbabies. And there's a legacy. If we get stuck into a conflict where it's always punisher mode, it creates this triangle where there's the punisher, then there's the victim. I should go like this, right? There's that punisher and the victim and the rescuer. And so in my household, oftentimes, it was Dan who was fussing at the kids, and the kids were the victim. And then I'd come in and I'd be like, whoa, 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 what's all the yelling for? We got to collapse the conflict and try and solve this. And my husband and I were fortunate to be foster parents, and we had a lot of kids that came to us who they themselves were constantly in punisher mode. Mostly because it's that defense mechanism. They were caught in that amygdala hijack. And so we would teach them about meeting your basic needs and being an amygdala hijack, and then talked about really what is it like when you are, like I was, raised by a guilter or a punisher. A guilter is a person who preaches the shoulds. You should have done this, you should have known better. Or it can be, well, your brother knows how to do it the right way, is something, that I heard when I was a kid. And oftentimes when we are raised with the majority of punishing and guilting, what happens, here's that uncomfortable stuff that I was talking about, is that there becomes this legacy that oftentimes kids, they will hide or deny or lie if they've made a mistake because they don't want to be punished. They know what the consequences are. They don't want to hear words of shame. And so they oftentimes are, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And, but, you know, I know adults to this day where they say, I'm sorry, oh, I'm sorry, all the time. And in reality, when we're in conversation with each other and our need for belonging and fun and freedom and feeling successful in our job, when those things are balanced, we're less apt to say sorry all the time and less apt to feel some of the shame that kind of comes with being stuck in that conflict triangle of punisher, rescuer, and victim. And so for you as an adult, I want you to reflect back a little bit about how you were raised. And there's also, my best friend was raised by a parent who was a buddy. And so these three ways of being, I'm not putting a blame and shame on them, because when we're in amygdala hijack, sometimes we go back into old behavior patterns from our past. I myself, as a teacher, I have been a punisher, and I have said words that were guilting, and I have done things where, oh, come on, you guys, do it for me. I know you don't like that teacher very much, but just do it for me so that you have a good day in their class. And then I'm like, what the, I just heard myself say something that's going to create a legacy of not being honest, or a legacy of dependency. If my students only behave for me, I'm not doing them any service, and I'm not really teaching them anything. And so when I would have to then give a consequence, a natural consequence for someone breaking a rule, then it would be, well, I thought you understood. Why did you, you know, and then you get that kind of, I thought you cared for me. And there becomes this weakness that happens, and it doesn't sustain a healthy relationship. And so the reason that we're unpacking these three is because they're there in all of us. I know coworkers where I see them when I was teaching, where they would use them, and they've had this training about Glasser's 5 basic needs and the 5 positions of control. And they'd come to me and they'd say, oh my God, all day today, I was just guilting, you know, and my response to that was, well, you want me to listen? Do you want me to brainstorm some ways you can fix it? Or, you know, do you want me to just tell you what to do? And my friends would usually just say, nah, I just need to vent. I know what I need to do. And, you know, and then I put on my listening hat, you know, and when we're able to monitor our own behavior, and this is what was happening when my friends came and they said, oh, I wasn't being the person that I wanted to be. And I felt like I crushed their souls today. It's like, well, what's it coming from? You know, and they would say where it was a multitude of things, right? You know how that triple effect happens, where it's like the worst storm, and all of a sudden you're just stuck in a conflict mode, and you can't seem to collapse the conflict. But one of the ways that you can is to recognize it, and then right in the minute, you know, say I made a mistake. How empowering is it for an adult to say to youth and children that they work with, you know, I'm not being my best self right now. I want to just take back the conflict we were all just in, because I gave you something that you didn't want to do, and let's talk about what's going on, and let's figure out how we can negotiate and navigate what needs to get done. Now, a monitor is oftentimes where teachers and parents find themselves. You say, what's the rule, or what do we believe in our house about telling the truth? It shows kids the difference between public and private. In your private life, you know, maybe there's swearing that happens. Maybe there's, I'm tired all the time, and you're sleeping, and the kids are just watching TV. And you know what? In the past 2 months, that's okay. We're kind of like tired from this amygdala hijack that we've been in. But if you do find, and you reflect back to the last 2 months, have I mostly been dealing with conflict from a punisher mode, a guilter mode, or have I been that monitor where I'm just saying, come on, you got to get your homework done. Here we go. Let's get it done. And giving rewards for it. You know, that's great. But this home stretch, weaving in and out of position 4 and 5, being a monitor and also being a manager is a great way to be able to help kids learn how to then take responsibility for their own behavior and start monitoring their own behavior and managing their own behavior. I think I wrote this wrong. This is supposed to be manager. So it's like, what do you believe? And you become strengthened if you ask, how can you fix it? Like with my coworker, do you want me to listen? Do you want me to brainstorm some ideas? Or do you know how to fix it? We can do that with kids. I do that with my soon-to-be 4 twin grandbabies, where if they are being a bit sassy and they want to come and play with me, it's like, you know, what do we believe about how we talk with people? And are we being nice? Or are we biting somebody's head off, you know? And so position 4 is where you're teaching the social skill of how you want people to be. And then position 5 is the manager. I see that I wrote that wrong on the slide, but this is the manager where you ask questions and ask students and kids to be able to be strengthened in fixing and solving their own conflicts that they're in. So I'm going to take a pause because now we've unpacked those 5 positions of control. And so, Rebecca, I'm going to ask you to share with me what the poll said. What percentage of people have heard of the 5 positions of control?
I don't actually have the poll results in front of me anymore, but a good majority of people said it was new to them.
Okay.
And some people were familiar with it.
Okay.
So it was, but most people, it was pretty new.
Pretty new. Good. So then then that gives us some questions for discussion here. So I'm going to ask for you if you have any questions that you want me to talk about when it comes to the 5 positions of control. Let's talk about it and unpack it a little bit. Here's what they look like next to each other. It's always about what does the teacher or the parent do? This work comes from William Glasser, and he, back in the 60s, he was a therapist. And so he then in the 80s kind of turned to taking his theories into classrooms and schools. And so this work comes from Diane Gosson, and she is a person who has been able to really do a great job at looking at what's the language we use when in a position of control, and how can we be aware of the words that we use, and are they floating from our past punisher words and language, guilter words and language kind of thing. And what's the way for us to weave in and out of that monitor manager role? So Rebecca, do you have any questions so far that I can unpack about the 5 different positions of control?
Nope, we have no questions yet.
No questions. So I did ask, think back about when you were being raised or when you were in your 20s. I would put my journey as I was a punisher guilter until I was in my teens, and then my parents kind of changed late elementary school. They changed the way that they were managing our behavior. And they were at this point where it was like, you know what, we're going to do a reboot. Instead of always yelling, they were young, they were in their 20s, they had 4 kids and not a lot of money. And so they sat us down at the dining room table, and they were like, I want less yelling, I want less arguing, I want less slamming of doors, and I don't want any spanking happening anymore. And so, and this was in the 70s. And so my mom was very influenced by Phil Donahue. He used to be the Oprah Winfrey of the 70s. And she saw a show that actually talked about being a monitor manager, teaching kids how to see how they learn and get in touch with their feelings and their behaviors so that they're able to monitor their own behavior, manage their own behavior. And when they're not doing a good job of managing the behavior, that's when an adult steps in and needs to be able to create a circle of support for kids. And so for me, you know, I went from punisher guilter, and then in my teens, I was in 4-H, and I was always a buddy. But when I got into my 20s and I was in a leadership position, I had to learn how to weave in and out of that monitor manager. So put down what you think that you were raised with in the chat. If you care to share, you don't have to. You can say, I care not to share. And then put down where you think you are now. And I don't see the chat, so I'm not seeing what people are writing, but I just kind of want to look at what some of the combinations are. How do you think you were raised? Yeah.
So Claudia asks, could it be a mix of these rather than one?
Oh, yes.
And somebody else writes, Bryn writes, monitor looks pretty good, but then the legacy of conforming does not seem that great. Could you please elaborate a bit?
Yes.
Is a monitor type good in some circumstances and not others?
Yes.
So some questions about just a little bit more clarification.
Excellent. So while you're putting down what you were raised with and where you think you're at now, I really believe that when it comes to the work we do at Amaze Works, naming bias, prejudice, and stereotypes, and being able to take action, in equity work, it's really important to not judge, to have bottom lines, but to not judge. And so there are times when people cross a bottom line with their behavior. If a sibling hits another sibling, there would be a punishment in my house. And, you know, we would have a conversation about what the punishment should be. And that monitor thing is because it takes time for people to be able to learn how to navigate in certain situations, right? So for example, in public, there are just rules about how to behave. When you're in a bank, you don't swear. When you're in a grocery store, you don't swear. They even have signs in some restaurants and bars that say, no swearing allowed, you're out if you swear. And so there are just these rules in society that the monitor is where that conformity is, but the manager is a person who knows how to, I can navigate my private life and my public life, right? So for example, my brother did a post reminding people that there are some people, when it comes to wearing masks, this is new. And it's gonna take a while for some people to realize that wearing a mask, me wearing a mask is gonna protect you. You wearing a mask is going to protect me. And the fear that we have creates some negative reactions from people. And what he reminded us to do is to give patience and compassion and not judge, because we're being punishers. I saw it on the news. A bar was going to open. It didn't open because that would be breaking the law. So I'm really glad they chose to be lawful, but they're going to go through the courts, you know, which is the appropriate way to take it. But there were a lot of people who were, you know, really shaming the people who were there supporting this person who was going to open their bar and couldn't. And that's a prime example of, you know, there's times when there's punishers. We don't need to be guilting people. You know, we can ask people to follow the rules, but it's about our beliefs, right? And so when do beliefs not necessarily match up? And that's when that monitor manager thing kind of weaves in and out. And the bottom line is, if we can have embracing the uncomfortable moment where you have compassion and non-judgment for people, if they're being a punisher, they become aware, whoa, maybe I shouldn't be doing that anywhere. And they learn how to weave in and out of being a monitor manager. The other thing is, like, so I worked in special education, but this is true, like potty training my grandbabies and everything, you know, that we're a token economy, right? You get paid, you do a good job so that you keep your job. Kids get gold stickers, when they learn how to be potty trained, or when they learn how to make the bed and do their chores, or at school when they've turned in their work. And so we live in a world where it is a monitor kind of thing, and we have to conform, and there are external rewards. But when you get people being their true selves and they're able to manage and monitor themselves, that's when the external world doesn't matter anymore, and their beliefs and the circle of security that you've created for them create the ability for them to monitor their own behavior and manage their own behavior. And this is what I mean by circle of security. I hope I answered your questions. Yes, we sometimes can go in and out of the 5 positions of control. I still raise my voice from time to time, and then have to apologize. Oh, I lost control. I was an amygdala hijack. No, I don't say that. But in my, you know, for me, how I make it right, I recognize that. And then I try and do a better job and fix the mistake that I've had. And the reason that I can do that is because early on in the 90s, I was shown this circle of security, which creates a circle of support. All our children need is this secure base. And sometimes we have to give them external rewards, you know, like a carrot, to be able to do something. Olivia loves it when I pull out my vegetables, and she always wants a carrot. And I always have to say, you can't be eating my food until you've finished your food. Otherwise, you won't have enough room for your food. You know, so then she eats her food, and then she gets a carrot, literally. But this is that what kids go through, right? They feel like they're attached and secure, and they've been given the boundaries, and they know the rules. As they age, they really know the rules. And so they're supported to go out and explore. And then when something happens, either they're an amygdala hijack, or they're afraid, or they're unsure of the company they're keeping, they'll come back and they'll ask for you to protect them. Now, I've used this with teenagers and asked them to do slides to teach other students about a circle of support and the 5 basic needs and the amygdala hijack. And it's really interesting how teenagers see this. For me, in our household, my dad would say, Dad, can I have the car to go out on Friday? And he would say, no B's, no keys. So if it wasn't A's or B's, you couldn't drive the car. Now, I always got B's, and my brother struggled, but we went out everywhere together. So I was the one who got to drive, and he didn't, because I had the B's and he didn't. On the flip side of that, he's the one who tutored me in math so that I could get a B in math, you know, so it was kind of like this equal opportunity thing for he and I. But my mom would say the same thing. If I would say, can I have some friends come over? She would say, yes, if. Yes, if your room is clean, you've done your chores, and you've basically been respectful and responsible all week, then yeah, you can plan. It's Thursday. You can plan to have friends over. You know, my mom was always plan it 24 hours in advance. And I would say, Mom, teenagers never plan it 24 hours in advance. But that was something that eventually we got to negotiate depending on, you know, who it was. But this is that circle of security and attachment that happens. In the very beginning, I showed you the brain and said that all brains are learning and developing at different ages and in different ways. And students and children and teenagers, young adults, we find like our people who have similar beliefs to us. And we then end up hanging out with those people. And so when we get into conflicts with people, especially children that we're raising, you got to look at what the intent of the behavior is. Don't make assumptions about what the behavior is and what's behind it. Ask questions, right? What's the purpose of that behavior? Always assume that any behavior is communicating something legitimate is going on. either their belonging need got shut down. In adolescence, there's a lot of shaming of each other that happens. Girls, especially in my experience, there was a lot of girls giving each other a hard time. I would come home mad off the bus and I would snap at my brothers. And my brothers would say, Mom, she doesn't have to do that to us. Because when I would get that way, they would know they would have to go to her because I wouldn't listen to them. I would just snip back with them, you know? And oftentimes it was because I was shamed by a peer. And that was the purpose of my behavior. And so my mom would always do a really good job of like saying, well, you know what you need to do when she gets in that mood. And then she'd say to me, Robin, you're working from a mean heart right now. When you find your kind heart, come and talk to me or go talk to your brother, but you need to fix this. And so that, you know, kind of helped me take the space I needed and navigate what I needed. And then also too, sometimes we assume that there's a temper tantrum, or as like I explained, that crabbiness and that manipulation thing. Sometimes we assume that that's going on to, oh, Mom, I'm sorry. Oh, Teal, I'm sorry. You know, and that like I'm trying to suck up to get something. But if you are honest with your children about their feelings and you're honest with them about how to manage their feelings and how to interpret their feelings and how to express their feelings, they're far better prepared to not be in conflict triangles where someone's being the punisher, someone has to rescue the situation, and someone has to be the victim. And it collapses those opportunities so there's less conflict in your house. So then what do you do with all of this? Well, the brain tells us we need oxytocin. It fights off our stress. There's cortisol that gets into our bloodstream, and that bloodstream needs to have less cortisol in it. And so oxytocin fights off the bad stressors. And I've been really proud of some of the news that was out there the first 3 weeks. Our kids that couldn't go to school, especially seniors and kids that were going through transitions that lost their last 2 months of the school year here, right? You know, for my grandpa, it was, he immigrated here from Sicily, my great-grandfather. And my grandfather, he dealt with wars. And my mother and my father dealt with civil rights and Vietnam. And when I was in college, the rocket blew up that had the teacher on board. And we experienced 9/11. So historically, we kind of got to look at, for our children and our young people, whose brains are still growing, because it doesn't finish growing till about 24, 25, the less that this can create stress in their body, and they can let it go by laughing, by finding creative ways to have an outlet, by talking about their feelings and how they're doing. It helps to get us into that center there where you're avoiding triggering those stress responses of the fight, flight, freeze, like we talked about. And it helps them to learn and grow and problem solve. I was really pleased. I work with high school kids. They just finished a production of Pirates of Penzance, and they did a phenomenal job. And a reporter had asked them, did you like giving up 4 days a week of rehearsing through Zoom during all of this, you know, craziness that's going on? They were like, yeah, it gave us something to look forward to. Personally, for me, it gave me something to look forward to. You know, I had a purpose, something to do. So whenever you can engage in connecting with people, it's going to help you to be able to navigate things in a way where the risk factors become less. And our capacity to think and problem solve becomes more when we create a circle of support for kids. All right, so let's get into some, Rebecca, if there's any other questions that have come up in the chat, go ahead and interrupt.
Yep. There are no questions right now.
Okay, so ways of responding when we're in conflict, right? So how we respond is key. That responding means, are we quiet? Are we triggered? Do we match the emotion of the person who we're in conflict with? If it's our children that we're taking care of or students that we're working with, what do we do so that we can calm our energy down? I think I mentioned I was a special education teacher, taught K through 12, and there were times where I worked with children who were in setting 4. They weren't in regular education, and they had a lot of anger and resentment about school. And so I had to be very direct but genuine. And I had to let them know that I was going to help them learn how to meet their needs and help them learn how to deal with their amygdala hijack. And so the more my relationship was the positive stuff with them, the more we had a positive relationship so that they would focus and have attention when I was teaching or when I was raising kids with my husband. That focus, I had several kids where focus and attention was a hard thing. And so I taught them the bilateral tapping. Put your arms in front. I'm going to give you a direction. I would say, you can do this too. Reach out in front of you and just tap your elbows. And it can be alternating, or it can be like counting to 9 and counting to 9 with the other hand, but keep it brief. So if I have them count to 9 and then they stopped and they counted to 9 and then took a breath and then they relaxed, that told me that they were calm, they were listening. And then I would say, okay, shake your arms and then put your hands out, count to 10. And so for me, it gave me a cue. If they were counting to 10 with their fingers and I could see that they were doing it slow, I could see that they were calm. And I could see that I've talked too much and it's their turn. So I'd have them bilateral tap when I had to teach something, and they had to do it 9 times or 18 times, or just do it. And then when they were done with that, I would have them count to 10. Breathing in and breathing out so that I could give them the direction and they would know how to follow the direction. Or I could say, okay, here's how I see the situation. Now let's figure out what needs to be done. Then it was my turn to listen. And then I would bilateral tap and keep it short. When in conflict, when in amygdala hijack, responding in a way that gets them to breathe, that triggers the brain in a way so that it untriggers the amygdala hijack, so that they can start watching, so that they can start problem solving and listening, so that the Wikipedia pages are going on. That's how you respond in these situations of stress. This is how you create that circle of support. They see that you're protecting them, you're comforting them by giving them something to do. Praise them. You know, my mom was real good at being able to say, you're working from a mean heart right now. I want to know where your kind heart is because I know you have one. And delight, oh, you turned that around fast. Thank you. You know, delighting in what's going on. And so being able to say your feelings, right? So this is one of the things I would have my children and my kids look at those. And we're going to give you a copy of this PowerPoint. So you're going to be able to, the things that I keep talking to and referring to, you're going to be able to look back at it. But you can teach your kids the basic needs of finding balance with belonging, fun and freedom with friends, and being able to have some success, school success identity, because their job is to be a student, right? Or to do their chores, or to be a big brother or a kind little sister kind of thing. And so teaching them, maybe you cut out magazines, or maybe you do some clip art. What does belonging look like to you? And then look at the images that they pull. What does fun look like you? Look at the images that they pull. That helps them to be able to talk and express about their feelings when their needs are being met. How are they feeling? Pretty happy, pretty successful. And when they're in conflict, giving them words to say so that they can talk and process those feelings as well. So say what you see, say how you feel, and then let's have a conversation about what we want done. And that's where that thing comes in with adolescents especially. Do you want me to listen? Do you want to problem solve and I'll help you come up with 1 or 2 things you can do? Or do you want me to tell you what to do? And I'm telling you, first graders can do assertive language like this when they've been taught the belonging, fun, freedom, and power and success, when they've been talked about controlling a situation. Usually I would wait until about 3rd grade before teaching the positions of control, but I have done that with my kids, and it helps them to be able to recognize that they're trying to manipulate me with trying to be my buddy, or they're trying to manipulate me by guilting me. Oh, you never let me do anything. My friends let me do it. You know, that kind of thing. Or I hate you. I've had that happen before. All of us as parents, I think, have experienced, or caregivers have experienced something like that. So knowing how to respond, knowing how to discuss and keeping it simple so that we're creating that circle of support for them. And then the last one is ways of transitioning, right? Transitions oftentimes become the biggest place of conflict when they're playing and they're having fun and they got to turn everything off and friends got to go home and they got to do some homework. That transition can be tough, right? So, you know, knowing what the rules are in the house, knowing what the expectations are, knowing what the beliefs are about being successful in school. My brother had a school failure identity because he had a learning disability that was not recognized until he was in 9th grade. And finally, a social studies teacher gave him a test and he got an A on it. And up until that point, he'd been failing, and it was because of difficulty reading. Well, now he reads because he knows, you know, how to flip his letters, and he knows what the difficulties in his learning disability was, and so he can fix it. But up until that time, transitions were very difficult for him, and he would create negative conflicts when it came to having to do schoolwork. So one of the things that I learned as an educator that would have worked so well for my brother, but it worked really well for my kids, was first this, then that. And you kind of narrate what's going to happen. With my kids, in the summer especially, I had to kind of chunk the summer days into 4 quadrants, right? Here are the 2 times of day before lunchtime, right? And so you can choose to do this or this during these time frames, right? So when you first wake up in the morning, you only can have an hour of TV, but then there needs to be some kind of creative play or active play or running around or riding your bike or doing something. And so chunking things out. First, you're going to eat your breakfast, and then you can choose. You're going to watch an hour of TV, or you're going to go play for a while, or you're going to go play for an hour for a while, and then come back and watch your hour of TV, and it's time for lunch. And the afternoon is chunked into 2 sections before supper. And so narrate what the process of ending is, right? Half an hour before lunch. Hey, you got to turn off that PlayStation in a half an hour. I'm setting the timer so that 5 minutes before noon, when we're going to eat, when you hear that timer, you pack up. Because if at noon you are not done with the timer that I've set for 5 minutes, and it's not put away and it's not turned off, then you're not playing that PlayStation again. And so that's how you're being really specific about how transitions happen. And then you ask for agreements on it, right? And so as the summer would get going, where there wasn't schoolwork to do anymore, but we had to create some routines. And being a teacher, there was always time to read. So they had to choose when were they going to do some reading in the home, or watching a documentary. That they love the History Channel and the Geographic Channel for documentaries. And those are just as good for them to watch as reading a book. But we would also need to do the reading the book time. We join the library, and you get rewards for reading with the library. But asking for agreements with your kids. How do you want summer to look so that we're not in conflict with each other? and then chunking out their days so that they know what the routines look like. If you have 3 weeks left of school, how can you chunk out the last 3 weeks of school? They do it in their games all the time that they play. They do a reboot where they have to start the game over again, or they haven't leveled up yet. Tell them it's time to level up. They know what needs to get done. How are you feeling about it? Are you stressed about it? Let's deal with those feelings. And then let's look at the calendar and let's just chunk out how we get done what you need to get done. Leaving time for fun, leaving time for some freedom and some creativity. I was sharing, I think last week or the week before in this webinar, how I've started, I Skype with my best friend from high school, but we do it once a week now on Sundays. And I get up in the middle of the night because she's in Vienna, Austria. And we bake brownies, just like we did when we had sleepovers. And I'm up at the middle of the night baking cookies or brownies, while she is in her 7 hours difference kind of thing, mid-morning with her daughter. And so her daughter and I get to bake brownies with each other, and we get to talk about how's her world, because things are really different in her world than they are in my world. And it's great to reach out to people. If it's hard to reach out to kids, find ways of, I love the sidewalk chalk that I see the news people doing. And so just going by people's houses, if you know elderly live there, and drawing some happy faces so that we can kind of spread some of the joy around is a really good thing to do. All right, so I've gone over with you the different ways of being. I know that there's big feelings that happen when creating that circle of support and doing a reboot. And if you're able to look at how you're reacting during conflicts, times of conflict, if you're able to put yourself in that weaving of monitor and managing kids' behavior so that they can manage their own behavior and monitor their own behavior, if you're having conversations about how their feelings are, my grandbaby, he's going on 4, and he has a meltdown with supper. There's some texture things about supper. And so she always, mom is trying really hard to just let him have his tantrum at the table throughout supper. First you have to eat, and she gets him to eat one thing. And it's the one thing that he doesn't want to eat, and it's a texture thing that he's screaming about. And she says, I hear you. First you're going to eat the crackers, the goldfish crackers, and then you can eat one broccoli, and so that there's ways of being able to first this, then that. So I'm going to wrap up, and then I'm going to give you some chances to ask questions. I hope you have some questions. If not, I hope that you find, when we send you this PowerPoint, I hope you find it resourceful and helpful for you. I have researchers. There's a lot of neuroscience out there, and science about bias, prejudice, and stereotypes. And the key message to send all people is, here's what you say. If you've been in conflict, collapse that conflict by saying, I don't want to be the punisher, and I don't want you to be the victim. Or if your kid's yelling at you, I wish you'd stop punishing me because I feel like the victim here. Let's rescue each other. And let's say how we see it, say how we feel, say what we want done. And then let's say some kind words about each other after we've made a plan for how we're going to fix it. And then you find that that amygdala hijack, that guard dog becomes in neutral, and you easily can find your way to a new beginning out of an argument that you've had by saying some of these positive things to your children, or the kids that you care for, or the students that you have, or to your spouse, or to friends, or to roommates. Because what we do need is that oxytocin in our brain to giggle and to laugh and to feel like we're seen, feel like we're heard, and feel like we're noticed. So these are just great researchers that have said things. Let kids know that if they're experiencing big emotions, that a bad mood doesn't last forever, that you can help them recognize and learn from their mood if they're in a struggling place. And then from there, there's other choices that can happen, and that their actions, slamming doors, swearing, yelling, that there's an impact in the whole environment on their mood. So what is it that you want? Is what you're doing helping? Are you getting what you want by doing this? Is it working? What will you do next? Hopefully these things are giving you some suggestions on how to meet your kids' needs so that you create that circle of support for them. And you're able to do a reboot if is needed. As always, what we're interested in at AmazeWorks is creating empathy and understanding, to not have judgment, embrace things that are uncomfortable so that kids can discover and develop those healthy, complex identities that give them resiliency in the face of difficult times. And especially if difficult times, I mean, we recognize, I heard the report driving in today, NPR was talking about people who are marginalized are experiencing this COVID-19 more so than others. People who are vulnerable are experiencing it more so than others. And whenever we can do our best to be able to keep that part of the conversation during this difficult time, but also by lifting each other up and creating a circle of support, it's gonna help so that people are seen and heard. So I have a bunch of things that are just a resource for you to create a connection, to regulate when you need to find calm, and then links that you go to, activities with kids, and then always, always self-care for you as the adult. I thank you so much for joining us today. This is the last of our 4 workshops. And this is where a lot of our work comes from that informs us in the work that we do. I'm open for any questions that you may have. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you like the work that we've done here, we'll be offering some more. Let us know and visit our website, see some of the other things that we offer. If we have great resources. You can see behind me, we have these lovely picture books. Talk to your school about bringing AmazeWorks into your school if you like. And we can do some of these workshops for teachers and other caregivers. So spread the word and continue to create circles of support for the ones that you care for, also for yourself. And thank you for joining us today. What questions do you have?
Yeah, so let's open up to questions. But I just wanted to put out 2 other little reminders for people. One is that the slideshows are emailed out immediately after or the next day after each webinar. And the video recordings will be available on our website. The first 2 recordings are already up under Resource Hub on our website, which is at amazeworks.org. And again, we've been able to provide these for free to caregivers and make everything available. But if you are willing and able, we appreciate a donation if possible. If that is something that seems like you would like to support. We are a nonprofit and working in education with a very unknown, uncertain future landscaping in education. And then the other thing is that we now have a store on our website where we can, where you can order our Persona dolls and our early child care kits and our family child care kits online without having to necessarily contact us. The elementary, secondary, and classroom dynamics programs are still available. We just don't have them on our store at this point. And so reach out to us, email us at info@amazeworks.org, or you can email directly to Robin with her email right there. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat here.
Yeah, I just want to point out once again that the 5 positions of control, they're just, you know, when you're in amygdala hijack, that Punisher mode is a fight, flight, freeze response way of being. And so if in your past you were raised by a Punisher or a guilter, even a buddy, remember that you know, there's reasons behind it. All behavior is purposeful, and there's good in everyone. And so really do your best to embrace with non-judgment what the past was. And especially for myself, I have to forgive myself when I switch into that mode, when I'm stressed or when I haven't had enough rest and I'm not thinking clearly. You know, I have to remind myself, drink a glass of water, suck on an ice cube, put ice cube on my wrist right here or on my neck. And that helps the physiological response of calming down when we're in amygdala hijack. Oftentimes, you know, that guilter, that buddy is the gossiping triangle that we get into sometimes at work when we're frustrated at work, and if we don't have open communication at work, we can get into conflict triangles. And so I just wanted to address that. The legacy is, there's so many other things that create our legacy, right? And so how we are is always evolving and changing. And so remember the pockets of joy from your childhood and the great things that you learned. And if things were difficult, learn how to breathe and let it go, and create a family of choice if you need to. And be around people who support you so you can support them. Any questions other than the 2 that I just addressed that I read? I'm glad it was helpful. From Karen. Do you see any other comments?
Yeah, some thank yous from people. It's great seeing people who've attended multiple times.
Good.
But I don't see any questions, so.
Okay. Well,
Wonderful.
Once again, I thank you so much. If there aren't any other questions, I will say have a wonderful day because it's lovely outside.
Okay, well, we will end here. Thank you, everyone. You all have a great day.
Good. How'd it go? Are we still on Facebook?
We're on Facebook still, and people are still on, so just give me a moment.
Oh, okay. Three messages.
Okay, Leanne, I think I can end Facebook, right?
Yes.
Okay. Did it end?
It should. Yeah.
Okay, great. And I can stop the recording. All right.